Hi everybody, my name is Larsen. You can use upper structure triads to create some rich, colorful and also interesting sounding voicings that are usually quite large, so they're going to be 4 or 5 notes. When you're working with this, it's a little bit different from the way that we normally work with voicings like shell voicings or drop 2 voicings, because there we learn inversions or take them through a scale and explore them like that. In this case, you kind of really need to just look at what's available and check them out and find them for each voicing. But at the same time, that's a really interesting exercise, and it's very good for both your fretboard knowledge and also just your theoretical overview of scales and the triads in there. In this video, I'm going to go over 4 sets of 2-5-1 voicings where I'm using upper structure triads, and I'm going to talk about how I'm thinking, what the theory is behind the construction, and also how I'm finding them on the neck. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, checking out some interesting arpeggios or scales, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. Let's look at the first example where you probably know some of the voicings already, and then talk about some of the basic ideas and some of the theory behind coming up with these upper structure triads. If we look at this first voicing for the D minor 7, I'm pretty sure you already played this voicing before, and you can also look at this as being a drop 2 voicing. In this case, we can look at it as being a C major triad on top of a D minor chord, and then really we only need to add the F to get the sound of the D minor, because the 7th is already in there, the C. So the C major is giving us 7, 9 and 11 on top of the D minor. So we get the sound of a D minor 11 with a 9. When you're working with this, the way you find the upper structure triads, there are 2 ways I think you can go about this. One is to just look at the chord as a stack of thirds and then extend it so that you have the whole scale. So that would be looking at it as being D, F, A, C, E, G and B, and then just figure out like, okay, what arpeggios or what triads do we have available if we look at this row of notes. Another way that you can work on this, which is a little bit more useful, especially when it comes to checking out stuff where stacking thirds are a little bit less meaningful, like the diminished scale or the alter scale, is to just take the diatonic triads and then relate them to the root, which is an important skill to have anyway, because you want to do that when you're working with chordal arpeggios or shell voicings or pentatonic scales. Anyway, this is stuff that we need whenever we're superimposing something, whether it's in a solo or as a chord voicing like here. So if we do that with the D minor 7 and just go over all the triads, so C, E, G, so if we relate that to a D minor, then this is of course 7, 9, 11. Now D minor, well, 1, 3, 5, E minor, so that's the 9, the 11 and the 13. The triad from the third, so F, is 3, 5, 7. The G major is 11, 13, root from the 5th. So A, that's the 5th, 7, 9. And then the B diminished, that's 13, root, 3rd. Thinking like this is useful. It's good to have this overview, and it's good to be used to just taking a set of notes and relating it to root, as I already mentioned. With this whole row of triads, I don't really want to have a 13 in the voicing right now. So that means that I can actually throw away all the triads that have a B in them. And that kind of leaves only the C, the D minor, the F major and the A minor. So the D minor is already just the D minor chord, so that's not really useful. And that means that we only have 3 different triads that we can use as upper structures when we're using this, this chord in this key. And that's the one from the 7th, the one from the 3rd and the one from the 5th. The voicing that I'm using on the G7 is this one, and we can look at that as being an E major triad over a G7. So this is coming out of the diminished scale because it has a flat 9 and a 13. And when it comes to the diminished scale is not really coming out of thirds based harmony. So we can use that it's symmetrical, and then I think I also tend to mostly focus on using the major and the minor triads as upper structures when I'm using these. So if we just look at that, for this diminished scale we have an E major triad, and we also have an E minor. Now the scale is symmetrical in minor thirds, so that means that we also have G and G minor, and B flat minor, and D flat and D flat minor. So those are 8 major and minor triads that we have. And then in this case, of course, the G7 is not going to add any color, so we're not really going to be using that. So we can kind of throw that out. Sometimes you may want to use the G minor. You probably want to work on the 6 other triads if you want to look for some good upper structures within the diminished scale. The last voicing in this set is this C major 7 voicing. So the way to look at this is probably that it's an A minor triad, so this first inversion A minor, and then I've added the B just to get sort of a C major sound, so we make it kind of into a C major with a 13. And again, this is just really just coming out of the C major scale. So we can just do exactly the same thing as we did with the D minor. So that means we have first the C major, that's just 1, 3, 5. D minor, which is going to be 9, 11, 13. E minor, which is the arpeggio from the third, or the triad from the third, so that's 3, 5, 7. F major, so that's going to be 11, 13, root. The 5th G, so that's going to be 5, 7, 9. The 6, which is going to be the 13, the root, and the 3rd. You can kind of hear me thinking, I think. Then we get the B diminished, and that's the 7th, the 9th, and the 11th. So of course, you can also do the same thing with a Lydian scale, and then you will have a few more options, because in this case, we don't really want to have the F on top of the C major 7. And that means that right now I can just throw away all the triads that have an F in them. So I'm left with C, which is not going to add much color, and actually going to clash with if we put a 7 under it. And then we have the E minor, which is the triad from the 3rd, the one from the 5th, which is G major, and then we have the one from the 6th, which is the A minor. And that was the one I was using here. After all this theory, then we can take a look at the next example and then talk a little bit more about how you actually find the voicings on the neck. The first voicing in this second set is using the same upper structure triad as in the first example. So this voicing is again just a C major triad, and then I'm adding the F to get the sound of the complete sound of the D minor. And that means that's basically the same as what I'm doing here. So the way you construct these voicings, now I'm using a C major 7, or sorry, a C major as an upper structure. So that means that I have this C major in the first example. Of course, I can just invert that along the neck. So this is the voicing here. Then if I invert that up the neck here, we have this. And all I need to do is find an F that I can add under it. I guess that would be here. Then I have a D minor 7, 11 voicing using this upper structure. The same goes if I'm up here, I can add this F. And that's of course also what I'm doing here. So, and then the other version, this one would actually be this, where this is the C major triad. So that's how I'm finding that voicing. And that's really how you explore this. So you do need to know your major and minor triad inversions if you want to work with this. But again, as I said, this is a really good exercise for your fretboard knowledge. And it's also just, if you have this triad, you need to figure out what notes you're missing in the chord and then see if you can find a way to play them under the triad. The next voicing is this G7 voicing, where I'm using an A flat minor upper structure. And then again, the only note I need to sort of add to this is an F. And if you look at how this would work along the neck, so that's an A flat minor triad, A flat minor triad. If I want to add the F, you have this voicing. You probably already know this is a drop 2 voicing for F half diminished or G7 altered. And then this one. And here I would probably have to do this to get that, again, giving us sort of an F half diminished type voicing. So that's what I'm doing here. Notice that also that when I'm going from this D minor voicing, then I have sort of this splitting of the C major triad on top of it, where the two high voices are moving down and the low voices moving up. So that's a very nice voice leading. And then I'm resolving that to this C major 7 voicing. Now this is really, it's a little bit difficult to play. It's maybe not the nicest key to do this in, but really this is just an E minor as a stack of thirds, because that's where this is sort of going with the voice leading. And it is playable, so you can experiment with using this a little bit, and it's a nice sort of different sound once in a while. And you can look at this as being a G major triad upper structure, and then really all I need to do is, when I have these notes, then I have the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th, and I'm missing the 3rd to get the sound of the C. Then I can even add the C here. So I'm just adding that under it, and if I do the same, just finding other versions of this, this is an inversion of the G major. I can add the E here and here, and this E I can add, well, in several ways. I can add it here. I can also add it here, depending on. And of course, we know this as a drop 3 voicing. Sometimes when you're working with this, you can actually use this because you want to have certain voice leading things happen along the way. So that can also be a good reason to do this stretch if you want to. Sometimes I end up using that anyway. The third example is sort of using the last variation of the C major triad as an upper structure for the D minor, because here I have this first inversion C major triad, and then I'm putting the F underneath it here. So we do have within the voicing this 7th gap, but I think that's kind of okay. You can sometimes try to fill those gaps a bit. In this case, I didn't really find a good way to do that without having to sort of do strange things with my thumb to actually play the notes. So I left that out, but it is possible to do so, of course. And then the G7 voicing I'm going to is this one. So here I'm really using an upper structure triad. This is a little bit difficult, might take a little bit of getting used to, because I'm barring in the middle here and then adding the B here and the G and the B flat here. So this is a G7 with a flat 13 and a sharp 9, and I have an E flat major upper structure. This is again coming out of the alto scale. So just quickly, if we run the alto scale in terms of upper structure triads with all the diatonic triads, then we have, so G altered is A flat melodic minor, and the diatonic triads are A flat, which is flat 9, 3rd, flat 13. So that's the one I used in the second example. Then we have the B flat minor, so that's the sharp 9, flat 5, and the 7th. Then we get the B augmented, so that's the 3rd, flat 13, root, D flat, so that's the flat 5, 7th, flat 9, and then E flat, that's the flat 13, the root, and the sharp 9. Then we get the 2 diminished, so that's the F diminished, that's the 7th, flat 9, 3rd, and then the G diminished, which is root, and then the sharp 9 and the flat 5. Using the E flat major as an upper structure is really a nice choice for the G7 altered sound. And besides having this version, you probably have this one, which is used a little bit more commonly, which is just using, so really just the E flat major triad here, then the one I'm using here, which is like this. The last one, which is not used that often, but actually also is quite a nice voicing. And it's a huge voicing in terms of just having really 5 different notes spread over the guitar strings. So for that, it's really nice to just have as a, if you really want to get a clear, rich, altered dominant sound in a ballad or something, then this is a nice voicing to use. The voicing I'm using on the C major 7 is this voicing, and it has a G major upper structure, and then of course I need to add an E under it, and that will be down here, and then I can just as easily also add the A in between. So that's kind of how I did that, also because then I have 5 different voices, and I can resolve this to also really a full sounding C major 7 chord. These upper structure voicings really shine when you can get to use them as these long, sustained, rich sounding 5-note chords. So in places where you're not really going to be adding too much rhythm, but you just want to add a lot of color. And that's also a little bit how I'm using it in this last example. The first voicing on the D minor 7 is using an A minor upper structure. And then of course when we have the A minor, then I only need to add the F, and then I have a complete chord sound. So I have these notes. And then in between I'm just adding and doubling the melody note with the A here. And then I'm moving into a G7 where I'm using a B flat minor triad. And then I'm adding the F and the B under it. This is really coming out of voice leading. So here I'm actually doubling the F, and then I'm adding the B, and then we have this. So of course for this it would be enough to just play this voicing. And you can do that as well, of course, but in this case I really just want to have the 5 notes in there and all the color of that. And then the C major that I'm going to here is this. So I'm using a G major upper structure, and then of course I need to add an E under that. And last time I added, the previous example I added an A, now I'm adding a C, simply because I found that in this case, this movement where this happens in the lower voices sounds really nice, so that's why I did that. So when I'm using voicings like this, then I am sometimes doubling notes, and you can also tell like there are a lot of choices where what extra note do you want to have in there? Do you want to have the A in there on the C major 7 or maybe the C? Because they both have different colors and they'll add different things to the voicing. And in this way, I think it's nice to explore and also just to think about what you like and also just to figure out and listen to the different chords and really get them into your system in that way. And I think that can be a good training for your ear, as well, of course, of all the training of finding the chords, knowing your triad inversions and your scales. And that in that way, it's really going to give you sort of a lot of overview of the neck, and it's going to help you both with comping, finding chords, and making your own voicings, and also just soloing and having an overview of the different scales. One way that we often use upper structure triads on guitar is actually that we use them when we're playing incomplete voicings. So that means that we're playing a voicing with a triad upper structure and then also leaving out maybe a third or maybe a seventh, because in the context that's going to be okay. So I didn't really talk about voicings like that in this video, also because I really wanted to focus on how you can make large voicings with this. But I'm of course also curious how you work with upper structure triads in your voicings. So if you have some great voicings that you're using or a favorite upper structure, then leave a comment. I find that I always learn something by checking out what's going on in the comments. And I think if you're interested in this topic, which you probably are if you've watched this much of the video, then you should check out the comments, because there's usually a lot of interesting information being shared down there. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding some good methods and solid strategies for checking out all the interesting things about jazz guitar and improvising. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons. And it's because of that I can keep on publishing videos every week. And if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.